for people to join. So thank you very much for joining us at the third of our informal webinars series. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, let me briefly introduce myself and what we're trying to do here. So my name is Koen Boone. I am an economist in the OECD Trade and Agriculture Directorate, working on food systems. And right now I am working on the topic of environmental impacts along food supply chains. And as we were working on that topic, it became clear that there's fortunately a lot happening these days around that topic. And then I mean not only in terms of academic research, but also new data sets and a host of new initiatives by civil society actors, by the public sector, and so on. And I thought it's fascinating to see all that activity, and it would actually be useful, we thought, to organize some informal way that we can connect dots between all these different initiatives and all the different people who are working on that from all these different angles. So that's where the idea for these informal webinars came from. And the way we do it is we have half an hour where we have one speaker who will present something we thought was worth sharing. Then we'll have, that's roughly 20 minutes of presentation and say 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A there. And that is sort of the core of the webinar. That part will be recorded and be posted on YouTube. And then after that, we take an optional extra half hour for those who want to stay around. You're not obliged to, but if you have the time and if you feel like it, you can stay around, and we put people in small random breakout sessions. And this way, the only goal there is really to connect people with similar interests. So you can meet new people who are working on similar topics or who maybe are coming at the same topic, but from a very different background. So the first part will be recorded, and then we'll send around the link to the recording afterwards. And I'll also send around PowerPoint presentations and the like. And if you hadn't seen yet my earlier emails, I'll also repeat the links to the recordings of the earlier webinars we had, and so on. So I'll briefly introduce our speaker next, but before I do that, let me also add that the goal of the breakout sessions is really just for you to meet other people. So we're not expecting you to come back to the plenary afterwards and give a debrief or whatever. So when that is done, feel free to just go your own way. And then we'll see each other again for a next informal webinar, which is on Wednesday, by the way. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, if you want to get in touch with the speaker or with other people that you met in the breakout sessions, feel free to send us an email and we'll be more than happy to connect you. So with that, it's a pleasure to welcome today Koen Boone, who is Director for Europe at the Sustainability Consortium and who is also the coordinator of sustainable value chains at Wageningen University and Research. And Koen has 20 years of experience in measuring sustainability in agriculture and food, whether it's at the product level, the level of companies or farms, or even at the level of the entire sector. And during the conversations and the expert discussions that we've had for our work, Koen has been a magnificent source of insights on all the different initiatives that are happening right now. And I mentioned earlier the rapid pace of change in terms of sustainability initiatives. And Koen has been a source of information for a lot of those initiatives for us. So we're very glad that he could join us today. So Koen, with that, I'll give the floor to you.
So thank you, Koen. I will first try to share my screen. I think you can see my first slide now. And thanks for the kind introduction, Koen, and for the opportunity to present here some of my work, and not only my work, but also the work that I did with other colleagues within Wageningen UR. And I gave my presentation the title Transparency, Sustainability, Food, Development in Public and Private Sector. And in my opinion, I work in this domain for about 20 years, but really in last 2 years, a lot has happened, and that can really be a game changer in this domain. So before I go into the content of my presentation, I would like to start with my core message. So currently, or in the past, maybe I should say, sustainability reporting or differentiating on sustainability was a voluntary choice. You could either choose to have a sustainability label or not, or you could have a sustainability report or not, and could choose your own indicators. But that is changing because of the following reason. So both governments the financial sector, but also retailers are going to demand transparency from all suppliers for all food, not only on voluntary base, but on mandatory base. And they also demand standardized impact indicators. And these type of indicators are much less sensitive for greenwashing. So in that way, sustainability is becoming relevant for all companies. I will mainly present initiatives on product level, but the same conclusions are more or less relevant for company and investment level. Now, this all creates new opportunities for incentives from all stakeholders for more sustainable production. And that's the reason why I think it might be a game changer. And the basic reason why this change has happened the last year is mainly the interest for greenhouse gas emissions. But in my opinion, other themes will follow. And the effects will not only influence greenhouse gas emissions, but also other sustainability themes. I already mentioned there are 3 organizations that ask for, or type of organizations that ask for sustainability information: the retail, the government, and the financial sector. I don't have the time to discuss them all, so we'll mainly focus on the retail and the government sector. And I will also present 2 initiatives on the retail level. One that I'm connected to, the Sustainability Consortium, but also the Eco Score that got a lot of publicity in the last years because it was implemented by several retailers on all their food products. Now, first about retail. Now, here you see a simplified version of a supply chain where retailers are in the middle, in the most cases quite concentrated, millions of producers, billions of consumers, and retailers are more or less the link between those 2 different groups. Now, they can have a big influence on suppliers, so stimulate suppliers to deliver more sustainable products through the different aspects that I presented here. But also in the direction of consumers, they can also influence consumers quite strongly in stimulating them to buy more sustainable products. And as a last part, if you want to build a business model on more sustainable products, on becoming more sustainable, also the involvement of retailers in a lot of cases is quite important. So in a research that we did for the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, we looked at a lot of initiatives that I called here impact or life cycle assessment initiatives. And they are different from the traditional way how retailers communicated about sustainability. Because in the case they did it most through labels like fair trade or organic production, and those labels are only available for a small percentage of the products that really qualify for that particular label. Now, all these initiatives that you can see here score all the food products on a continuum, taking a very large number of environmental issues into account. And in that way, they're really different than the type of communication in the past. And therefore, the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture asked us to look a bit more in detail, to look at the differences between the different initiatives, and also to see if that could, one of these initiatives could lead to a harmonized system that could be used over all food in Europe. I will go a bit more in detail later on some of the initiatives. But first, and the comparison between all those initiatives, but first a bit more about 2 of those, so you can see how they work. The first one is the Sustainability Consortium. It's not new. It started already in 2009 as a cooperation between industry and NGOs and science. So we have about 100 members, mainly from the industry, all parts of the supply chain, retailers, food processing, input suppliers, NGOs like WWF, and universities that you can see at the bottom of the screen. We developed sustainability standards for 115 product categories, taking both social and environmental issues into account. We try to minimize costs by global harmonization, alignment with leading initiatives, and by scale. And that system is over the years implemented by about 2,000 companies that use the globally standardized method to report to their retailers. And because it's globally standardized, they only have to report once, and all the different users can use the same information for assessing the sustainability of their suppliers. We use that for retailers, wholesalers, and catering organizations, as I showed in the earlier slide, but also to inform financial institutes about sustainability performance of their clients. And they provide a discount to companies that get a minimum sustainability score. It's also used by the Dutch government for buying catering services, and they give bonus points to catering organizations that work with a system like the Sustainability Consortium that stimulates continuous improvement of sustainability. And we also did some experimenting on for communicating to consumers, but that's still very experimental and small. But in this way, we try to lower the cost as much as possible by just asking for brands to report once and then use it for all kind of different purposes. And in that way, create small incentives from all different angles to make products more sustainable. Then the second example that is used by retailers, it's called EcoScore. And it's a bit of a copy of the Nutri-Score, which is often used in Europe for measuring healthiness of food. And EcoScore developed the same kind of system where all products are scored from A to E. And in that way, you get an impression about the environmental sustainability of products. And in this slide, I presented the methodology that they use for that. So they first start with a life cycle assessment database that gives for 2,500 product categories the average score of that product category. So how sustainable is beef, or how sustainable are strawberries, or how sustainable are potatoes. And by assessing those different product categories, a product category gets a score from A to E. And then they also try to bring into the calculation how sustainable a particular producer of that particular product is. So if you know that on average strawberries have a score of 60, a producer can make the score of their product more sustainable by applying sustainable practices. And here you can see what I take into account. So if a product has a sustainability label, organic or fair trade, then that producer gets positive additional points, but they can also get negative points if the product was imported from far away. So there are a lot of environmental burden with the transport that related to the product. The score is also calculated by the environmental policy in the country of the origin of the ingredients. So if there's a very strict policy, you get bonus points, and the other way around. And they also take circularity of packaging and threatened species into account. So in that way, they try to develop something that both take the sustainability of a product category into account as how sustainable the particular producer is, to stimulate also the producer to make the products more sustainable, and also to stimulate consumers to choose the most sustainable product. It's a bit the way how they take producer specific elements into account is a bit simplistic, but that makes the system also very practical and easy to implement. And that's the reason why Colruyt and Carrefour and Lidl started experimenting with this system. Then some general conclusions about those new systems based on life cycle assessment. They have some advantages because they can be made available for all food. You can easily measure continuous improvement because they score on a continuous scale. So it's not like with labeling that you either have the label or you don't have the label. You can have a score from 1 to 200. And they are multi-purpose, so they help choosing between product categories, but also within a product category, and for business-to-business communication and for business-to-consumer communication. There are also some disadvantages. So life cycle assessment is quite complex, so the workload can be quite heavy. Assurance methodologies still need to be developed, so you're sure that the number that the product calculates is the right number. There are still several methodological issues that need to be solved. And although it is possible to provide incentives and a business model, they still need to be developed. But overall conclusion is that these systems have a potential to have a high impact on the sustainability of food. We looked at the methodologies of all those systems, but we also looked at had a lot of interviews with stakeholders to see how much support for those systems are, and also to check how they see them developing in the future. And in this slide, I provide a bit around that. So we concluded that the scalability of these systems is really improved, both because standardized methodologies are available and because those databases with average product category information are available in several countries. So that makes it easier to apply them. You can also see there's more demand for it. I already mentioned greenhouse gas emission. That was not really well covered by the existing labeling system. So there was a need for more quantitative information. There was also the demand to prevent greenwashing. Some of the labeling systems were not really demanding, and it was not always clear if it really led to more sustainable products. The science-based target thinking has also improved it. So it's a way to check if a company's product is for example, in line with the Paris Agreement, where you can really check if a company does enough to make the world sustainable. And the last demand is that the comparison between product category became more important, when also several governments had goals on protein transition, for example. Nearly all stakeholders see impact system as the long-term future. You can already see that the more traditional labels are already taking impact type of indicators into account. Also, government play a quite important role, initiating, harmonizing, but also supporting these type of initiatives. And the retailers show a lot of interest, especially because they can also be used for consumer communication. And that was all about retail. Then something about the role of governments. And on this first slide, I present some of the initiatives of the European Commission. So the European Commission had a lot of plans to make products more sustainable, companies more sustainable. And one of them is the initiative on substantiating green claims. And within this initiative, they developed a standard for life cycle assessment, the product environmental footprint. They're working on that for about 10 years. And this summer, they will tell how the product environmental footprint will be used in policy making. Will it be something mandatory that has to be used on all products? Will it be voluntary or something in between? Then in 2023, they will launch a sustainable food labeling framework that not only takes environmental aspects into account, but also nutritional, climate, and social aspects. And currently the consultation is open. So if you're interested in their plans, you can look at it and give comments. Then those two things are still plans. The next one is already implemented. So the EU decided that the 50,000 largest companies in Europe have to report on yearly basis following a standard developed by the European Commission. So specific indicators, and they also need to do assurance on those indicators so that the users are sure that the numbers are right. Now, the standard is currently developed, and either over the year 2023 or 2024, that will be the first reporting year that companies should report using these indicators. Then there is a sustainable corporate governance that I'm going to skip because of time reasons. The last one I want to mention is not an initiative of the European Commission, but it's a global initiative where the International Financial Reporting Standard, the organization that is responsible for the international financial standards, so how to calculate profits and those type of things. They started a group to develop a sustainability reporting standard, and normally these standards are adopted in the regulation of the 150 countries that are connected to this organization. And that means that in all those countries, sustainability reporting will be mandatory. Now that's on European level and on global level. Also, a lot of countries are quite active. And France is a front runner in that. So in France, from 2023 on, all products should provide information about the environmental impact of those products. And the methodology that is used has a bit of overlap with EcoScore that I just presented. So they also use the generic LCA product category averages. But what they add is that companies preferably provide company-specific life cycle assessment information, so that you get a specific score taking all the relevant things into account for that particular producer. They know that it's demanding, and therefore they also give the possibility to use averages. And they're also working on systems like also EcoScore has, where you provide some simple information and that is translated to an LCA score. France is a front runner in the way that it will be more or less mandatory from next year on. But also in the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark, governments are having projects or already starting initiatives to make climate reporting or environmental reporting possible in those countries following a government standard. They're voluntary, but and sometimes they only cover climate. But yeah, in other ways, it's a bit comparable with the initiative in France. Now this last slide gives a comparison of a lot of those different initiatives, so both private and public initiatives. I will not go in detail now because I don't have the time for it, but I will share my slides with you so you can study the differences between the initiatives a bit more in detail. Then coming to an end of my presentation. So my core message was, in the past, sustainability was voluntary, using your own format and indicators. Now it's becoming mandatory. So all companies, all food has to communicate on the environmental impact of it, and that will create a lot of new opportunities. And then my last slide on the conclusions. So impact measurement becomes scalable. Most stakeholders will see it as a long-term future, although there are still quite some challenges, methodological challenges, but also data availability, assurance, and those type of things. But given the fact that so many governments and private organizations are working on improvements, I think they will be quickly solved. And then this development can really be a game changer in measuring and communicating sustainability of products, companies, and investments. So thanks.
Thank you, Koen, for this very interesting overview of that fast-changing landscape. I see we have 5 minutes for a bit of Q&A. So as we've done for previous sessions, you can either use the raise hand function in Zoom if you want to ask a question, or you can also just type your question in the chat. And while you're all thinking of a good first question to ask, I'll maybe use my prerogative to ask the first question. So Koen, some of the initiatives you mentioned, actually quite a few of them seem to really center on the retailers. And you mentioned that there's some mandatory things in the works as well, but it often seems to be the retailers who are really the driving force for that. What is the reason that retailers feel that they have to do this?
I think in the past also other parts of the supply chain took the initiative to develop standardized measurements. But in a lot of cases, it was just one product category or one sector, or so yeah, really spread, and every product category could have a different methodology and that way. So for consumer communication, that doesn't work, because then you have, like with the labeling, all those different initiatives that use different methodology, and that is very confusing for consumers, but also for retailers that buy all those different product categories. So although those initiatives have been there for 20, 30 years, they have not been that impactful because of all the differentiation. The reason, the fact that retailers are now implementing those type of systems really make it different, because then yeah, it's one harmonized methodology that is applied on all food, and therefore yeah, I presented some of those over here, because I think that they can be quite impactful, both in influencing consumer behavior and suppliers. Now, why are retailers doing this? I think because they want to give consumers additional support in buying more sustainable products, and by being the first or among the first that can deliver this type of information, they hope they can attract more consumers, but also to show how committed they are to sustainability. And it's also quite useful for themselves in supporting the purchasing of products. So for the business to retail communication, yeah, this type of information is also useful. They also worked on a lot of systems in the past, but to have a scalable system that can support retailers in their purchasing, yeah, is also very helpful for their own management.
Interesting, thank you. And I see that Mark Cropper has his hand up. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Koen. Koen, thank you very much. That was excellent. I looked quickly down the list of attendees. It's quite what we say Eurocentric in OECD circles. Not everybody, but I just wanted to be clear without being too legalistic. So the proposal on corporate social responsibility, that is a directive. It will be going through process in Council and Parliament. So but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think it will be implemented immediately. But you're right, there is a timeline and there is a train coming, so we're in time to catch it. So it was just a clarification. If that's your understanding as well, I didn't want listeners to go away thinking it was going to happen immediately. Thanks.
No, I agree with you, but the first steps have been approved by Parliament. Now they're developing the methodology that will be available this summer, and of course national parliaments have to agree again. But the timelines are quite ambitious, already starting either in 2023 or 2024. So in that way, it's coming quite close.
Kanar, go ahead. I think you're mute.
Working?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Sorry. Okay. So in terms, I mean, this seems to be like it's the law. It will be mandatory for it. If it becomes a law, it becomes mandatory for companies to adopt it. But has there been any studies on like consumers' willingness to pay premium prices for such services, or is there any studies on whether this will have any cost implication on producers, like on supply chain, in order to provide this scoring, will they have to, let's say, have additional costs that will be passed on to consumers, or additional costs that they have to deduct it from their own profit? Thank you.
So any data assembling will also come with costs. So whatever system you propose, even if it's a very simple one, there are always some costs in data assembling. If we don't do this, the cost will probably be much higher, because we don't take sustainability issues into account, and somebody has to pay for pollution and all those kind of things. So I think trying to bring it into the market mechanism is, for the society as a whole, a good development, because in that way we can prevent the cost that will happen in the future. Of course, we have to take into account that the costs are not only paid by primary producers or by any other party, but that it's equally distributed, and the pain is shared by all the parts of the supply chain. That was your last part of your question. The first part, are consumers willing to pay more? There's a limited group that wants to pay more, but by providing this information, there are more ways than to stimulate consumers to buy more sustainable products than just putting a label on it. What happened in the past. So some research has been done that when a product has a very bad sustainability rating, that is more influential than a good sustainability rating, for example. And in the past, we only had a label with good sustainability rating. But now, if you rate all products, the products are doing not really well, that will have quite a big influence that consumers don't want to buy those products anymore. There are also opportunities to look over the full set of purchasing that the consumer does. So you can, for example, on the invoice, when he leaves the supermarket, he can get a total score. You can have games with giving green points to consumers, but you can also even give financial incentives by governments, by subsidies or taxes. And there is the example of Belgium health insurance company, for example, that gives a discount to their clients if they buy products with a good health score. Now, all those things are also possible if you have a score for all the food products, and that means that there are a lot of additional ways how to incentivize consumers to buy more products, and also to pay a premium on those products.
Thank you. I see it's actually 3:30 now, or at least it is here in Paris. But one of the advantages of this being an informal webinar is that we get to make our own rules. So I'm still going to take a few questions, maybe. Ivan, go ahead.
So in your presentation of the EcoScore, you mentioned that some additional points could be granted to based on the country of origin, if this country had some, for instance, good environmental policies. Is that done on a product basis, or is that more global, like, okay, this country has a good environmental policy? So, or does that take into account that maybe some practices are good for some production, but not for all of them, for any reason?
It's not a very advanced system, so it uses the Yale Environmental Index, and that is a way to assess the general environmental policy. So it's not the environmental policy related to food or agriculture, it's just the general environmental policy. And yeah, probably that's also the weakest part, in my opinion, of EcoScore, because the relation of an individual producer with the general environmental policy, can be quite weak. But yeah, that's it's a way to at least introduce something in a simple way, because those index numbers are available for all countries in the world. and yeah, at least you take something into account. So it's a start, I would say.
Thank you. Okay, we'll still have a question from Axel and from Alexander, and then we'll go to the breakout sessions. Axel?
Yes, thank you. My question is related actually to the very first question, and I was wondering, given that we heard that the enforcement of this sustainable standard comes also at some cost, should we expect in the future a further concentration in the retail sector to, let's say, develop and adopt these new sustainable standards? Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't think that more concentration of retailers is a good thing. And I think in several countries, the main ones are already at a limit where competition authorities will not allow further concentration because they will get too much power. And you could even wonder if currently, in some cases, they are not too powerful. In the Netherlands, we're also working on a reporting standard where we ask retailers to report in a standardized format on how they contribute to a more sustainable food system. As a society, we give a lot of power to those large retailers. And I think it will not be too much to ask to let them also report on how they use the power and how they contribute to making supply chains more sustainable. And if you combine that type of reporting on the retail level with the type of initiatives that I produce, so how are they using the eco-score type of things to make supply chains more sustainable, both in the direction of consumers as suppliers. Yeah, that's also a way how we as a society can check if they're not misusing their power, and in the opposite, can use their power also to make food systems more sustainable.
Alexander, you have the final question of this session. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, my question also regards the eco score, and I wonder if that's not a bit tautological approach. If a product is more sustainable, if it has a sustainability label, but then so who determines that products that have a sustainability label are sustainable? I mean, there must then be criteria or metrics to measure the sustainability of the products that have a label. And then why not use that information, if it really exists, to calculate the score? I mean, so, and if there's no information on the actual sustainability because it's just process-based, then it's a bit an empty information.
I think that eco-score has really developed an innovative system that is attractive because it's really different from the past. But on the other hand, it's also quite simplistic. So I don't think that in its current form, it should be the final solution, how we should communicate sustainability on product level. But because they started with this, it resulted to a lot of attention, both from government and private industry. So I think it was really a good start to show this is possible, this is simplistic, we have to improve. And that's also related to your remark. So I agree with you. So combining life cycle assessment with labels is risky because there's also some overlap between those two. The way how they give scores to labels is also not completely transparent. So they have different scores for different type of labels, but it's not really clear how they made these calculations. And there might not even be the risk, as you describe it, that labels that are not of high quality and don't have that much impact might also get bonus points in this system. But what I try to do is to, and where they add and where they really add to labels is that they also take the sustainability of product categories into account. So that's something that is useful for consumers, and that is not covered by labels. So that's a clear advantage. The way how they take producer-specific information into account, I think there's still room for improvement.
Thank you.
Interesting discussion. Thank you. So we'll conclude here with the core parts of our informal webinar for today. So thank you very much to Koen, and thank you very much for all of you for your questions. So we'll stop the recording here, and then that recording will